Howdy, and welcome to this Life Lesson Friday episode of the Confidence Through Health podcast. I'm your host, Jerry Snyder. And one of the things that I always talk to my athletes about is understanding that you can't avoid the pain. Because if you're trying to do your best and not doing your best, as Steve Prefontaine has been quoted saying, to not do your best is to sacrifice the gift that you've been given. So that doesn't mean we're going to be our utmost best every time, as far as like a personal record, every time we do something. It's not like if we're a salesperson, every week, we're gonna continually hit more and more sales every week, because eventually we're gonna top out. We're gonna have it's an ebb and flow. Same thing with athletes. Otherwise, the record for running 100 meters would be 0 seconds, because somebody would have just kept getting faster and faster and faster, kept trying, and they would eventually, right? But it's not possible to do that every single time. What is possible is to give your best every time you try and do something. And when you try to give your best, it means that you're going to butt up against a barrier along the way that's trying to prevent you from being there. In athletics, it's a lot of times it's your body or it's the competitor that you're going against. In life, it can just be a traffic jam. It can be, other sales reps that have either better offers or are trying to lowball the competition. And so, there's always a barrier that is there. In athletics, a lot of time it's our physical pain barrier that we butt up against. And I'm not talking about an injury pain. I'm just talking about we're going as hard as we can. Our body starts to give out. We start to feel that pain of activity. If we're going to give our best, it's inherent that that pain is going to show up at some point. Because if that pain doesn't show up, we never really pushed to our maximum level. Okay. So when that pain shows up, what do you do? Because if you start your activity, if you go into your competition and you don't expect to have difficulties along the way, to have barriers, to have obstacles come at you that you have to overcome. If you start without knowing that those are coming, then you haven't prepared yourself very well. Because yes, we need to do the little steps along the way. I talk about that all the time, the little steps of the plan all the time. And when you go to perform, it's the preparation that you've done to that point that's going to show up in your performance. But going into it, not acknowledging that those things are going to be there, doesn't mean that we have to be afraid of them. We need to acknowledge that it's there so that we know when it happens, what are we going to do? If you're giving a presentation and and you haven't thought about what's going to happen if I forget my lines or forget my notes or forget what I'm going to say, or what's going to happen if somebody starts to heckle me, what am I going to do? What's going to happen if I start to sweat? What's going to happen if, like, go through those things in your mind, and that may or may not happen. But if you aren't prepared for those things to happen, then when they do happen, it's going to really throw you off. And a lot of times we'll back down from that barrier because we weren't expecting it. We didn't know what was going to happen. And it freaks us out to the point where we say, I don't want to do that. And so I'm gonna go away. I'm gonna move away from that. In an athletic standpoint, it means I'm gonna give in and I'm gonna slow down, or I'm gonna not perform as well. I'm not gonna jump as high if I'm jumping. Like those things show up 100% of the time, and you can see them in almost every athletic performance. You can see them happen. No speech is perfect. No speech is completely, like, done completely without hitch, without hiccup, without forgetting a line, without forgetting to say something. And you can see this in churches across the nation because pastors speak. Pastors, priests, they speak, right? They write something down and then they go out and they speak it. And For those churches where they have more than one service, if you sit through both of them, you'll hear a variation of the same thing in both services. Most of it'll be the same, but there'll be 2 to 5% of it that's different because either they went too long, they told the story too long, they forgot something, they thought of something else to mention because maybe in the first service they forgot to mention something. In the second service, they'll point out and they'll mention it, and then maybe they have to cut something else out because they go too long. So being prepared for these things is half the battle of being on the other side of it successful. Being prepared for when the pain shows up, not trying to avoid it. Because if you try to avoid it, you're not going to be as successful as you can be. You're not going to use your gift. And if you try to, in a speaking standpoint, a lot of people, a large percentage of people are afraid to speak in public. And a big piece of it is because they just don't put those contingencies in place. And so they think they have to be perfect, and they don't have to be because they don't know how to address those things that could come up. And once you learn how to address them, speaking in public is easy. It's actually very easy once you learn how to address them. I've done it many, many times. I used to be petrified of it. I used to ask to not do it, to avoid it. And then I learned how to do it properly. And I learned how to be prepared for those things to happen, and learned that it's actually not so bad. So that's the life lesson Friday, is understanding that those things are going to happen in your life. You have to be prepared. You have to have a plan of action to go around them as opposed to avoiding them. Because if all we're doing is trying to avoid the things that make us uncomfortable and cause us pain, then we're never going to grow. We're never going to reach that success that we think we should have. And we're never going to use the gifts that we have to our utmost potential. So that's the Life Lesson Friday for this episode.